Well, let's go straight to our panel now from Melbourne. One of the Greens senators, the new Greens senators, in fact, Victoria's first Greens senator, Richard Di Natale. Thanks for your time.
Pleasure.
And from Brisbane, Liberal MP Steve Ciobo. Steve Ciobo, good morning. First to you. Would the Liberal Party ever support a push on privacy, the likes of that being pushed by Nick Xenophon?
You know, David, I listened with interest to what Senator Xenophon had to say, and the thing about Senator Xenophon is he's always very good for a headline. I'm not convinced that he's very good when it comes to actually dealing with facts or accuracy. The reality is that there are lots and lots of exemptions where we don't have a one-size-fits-all approach. For example, using a mobile phone in a car. That's something that's illegal for everybody, but there are exemptions that apply to police and emergency services, for example. The reality is that the exemptions that exist to provide members of Parliament with the electoral roll exist for good reason, and that's because members of Parliament have a requirement to service their electorate. That means communicating with their electorate about important matters of policy. I make no apology for communicating with my electorate. In fact, David, I've got to say most people respond very favourably to the fact that I'm talking to them about issues, that I'm asking them about their views on different issues. Nick Xenophon wants to make out that it's some kind of a loophole and that, you know, we're rorting the system. It's absolute rubbish. The fact is, if somebody wants to opt out, to use his words, they can do that now, and I won't send them any more information. So I think that Nick's more interested in a headline than he is in dealing with actual facts.
Richard Di Natale, is this the sort of issue that the Greens would feel passionate enough about to try and force the government's hand on?
Oh, look, we'd look very favourably upon this proposal. I think Senator Xenophon's right on the money here. Let's be frank about why politicians want access to individual members in their community. It's to try and garner support. I've got lots of fridge magnets from my local member, lots of criticism about the government. I've got reams of information, none of which really make me more informed, all of which are targeted at trying to get people to vote for my local member. Senator Xenophon's right. It's about making sure that individual privacy is protected. It is a loophole. It's something we would support, as we've supported greater transparency right across a number of areas, from political donations to individual privacy, and of course we offer him our support.
But would you have any hope, do you think, of convincing either? It doesn't sound like you're convinced the coalition. What about Labor? Any hope of convincing them, do you think?
Oh, look, I'm sure that'll be a dialogue that's had. Ultimately, it'll be up to the Labor Party to decide whether they support protecting the rights of individuals and protecting their privacy. But I'd hope they'd support it. It's an important reform. We've got a great opportunity now to look at introducing a reform in the midst of the discussion around privacy and the media. It's a great opportunity to do it, and I hope the Labor Party's open to it.
Well, the Greens have been unable to get exactly what they wanted when it comes to asylum seeker policy. What are the main concerns that the Greens have, Richard Di Natale, about the treatment of asylum seekers in Malaysia? Surely sending them back to Malaysia, where perhaps humanitarian concerns do reside, is better than them ending up shipwrecked on rocks on the coast of Australia or sinking in the ocean?
Well, you're right to cite humanitarian concerns. That is our primary issue with this policy. Let's remember this is about young children, families, individuals fleeing war-torn situations, often risking their life to get out of their country, doing it because they know that if they don't, they face near certain death in some cases. And what we're doing is exporting our obligations under international law to another country, and another country where we can't guarantee that those individuals will be looked after. Malaysia is not a signatory to the UN Convention on Human Rights. We know that we are, as a nation, obliged to, under international law, to look after these people, to provide them with refuge and safety, and we're outsourcing our obligations to another country. Now, a decent country doesn't do that. This is, in terms of the numbers coming to this country, a drop in the ocean. We, as a country, can do better. Most people, when explained with the facts, the numbers, and put into its proper context, actually support the Greens policy, which is to process individuals on shore for health and security reasons, house them in the community. Of course, if they're not refugees, they're sent back to their home countries. But if they are, they become happy, productive citizens of the Australian community, and that's as it should be.
Steve Ciobo, the government's trying to sell the message that asylum seekers are going to be turned away. They're even using Facebook and YouTube. We know that asylum seekers do often have access to computers while they are waiting to come to Australia. Do you think this is a reasonable way to sell the message?
You know, David, I pity this government in some respects because this has just been such a colossal failure. I mean, I find it hard to believe, and I suspect most Australians do, that the government is seriously attempting to look us in the eye and say that a key part of their campaign against people smugglers is to put up YouTube videos and Facebook posts. I mean, you know, what are they going to do? Try to stop the boats from coming by status updates on Facebook? I mean, this whole thing has become a joke. Let's be clear where we've come from, David.
Well, I'm sure they wouldn't say it's a key part of their policy, just an important part of selling the policy, of getting the information out there.
No, the problem, David, comes down to this. We had a system that worked under the Coalition. When the Coalition left office, there were about 4 people in detention who'd arrived in Australia by boat. 4 people. Now we've had nearly 12,000 people since Labor was elected and changed the laws. And what the Malaysia deal is, David, is an explicit statement by the government that the reason we saw a massive spike in the number of people arriving in this country by boat was because Labor changed the laws. And what they've now done is gone full circle so that they're back to introducing third-party offshore processing exactly in a similar sense to what the Coalition had, except that Nauru is actually a signatory of the UNHCR and Malaysia isn't. And they're doing this and now claiming that this is going to work. The question is, why did Labor change the policy to begin with? And why have they been so stubborn about refusing to deal with Nauru, which was always going to be a solution that was viable, that was already in place, that was ready to go, and importantly, complied with the Prime Minister's promise when she said that she would not do a deal with a country that was not a UN signatory. Nauru is, Malaysia isn't. It's just once again an example of this Prime Minister saying one thing and doing something else.
Okay, well, we're going to have to take a very quick... just very quickly, Richard.
I was going to say, it's interesting that Steven Ciobo defines a system that worked under his government, which was a system that saw people sew their lips together, commit suicide, a system where young children suffered intolerable mental health hardship, where people were committing suicide. If that's a system that works, I'd hate to see a system that didn't work.
And is this is Labor's policy working now? I mean, we have riots happening now. We have. Hang on, I listen to you. Hear me out. We have people losing their lives at sea. We've got people rioting and burning down detention centres now, and that's with Labor's policy. And the fact is, Richard, that the Greens cannot escape the fact that if your loony policies were introduced, we would have thousands more people attempting to make this perilous voyage on the sea if your policies were in place. And so I say thank God that your policies are not, because the problem would be even worse.
Okay, we do have to take a very quick break.
I'm critical of both parties on this issue.
Sorry, Richard. We do have to take a very quick break. We'll be back after this short message to look at a few other interesting issues, interest rates, where they may be going, and the ever-contentious issue of gay marriage as well. So stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, later this morning, all eyes will be on the inflation figures out at 11:30 to try and get a hint of what's in store for interest rates. Yesterday, the Reserve Bank Governor, Glenn Stevens, warned of a dismal rate of productivity for the country at the moment and said the good old days when it comes to the retail sector of the 1990s and 2000s are unlikely to return. Well, on our panel this morning, Greens Senator Richard Di Natale and Liberal MP Steve Ciobo are still with us. Steve Ciobo, first to you. This dismal rate of productivity, how much of that do you think has to do with industrial relations?
Oh, well, look, it's been reported that the Reserve Bank Governor Glenn Stevens made comments yesterday that tied productivity right back to labour market reform. There can be no escaping the fact that Labor's massive re-regulation of the industrial relations landscape of the labour market is having a profound impact in terms of pushing down Australia's productivity. The reality is that part of the reason why I believe the Australian community is feeling more pessimistic isn't just the incompetence of the Gillard Labor government and the alliance it has with the Greens, but also obviously international factors, but additionally the fact that the small business sector isn't employing. And the reason the small business sector isn't employing is because Labor has made it just so expensive to give people a job, has made it so difficult to give people the chance of employment because of this massive re-regulation. And plus, of course, industrial disputation levels are right up. And this is all tied back to the government's ideological bent on delivering as much power as possible back to the trade union movement, because after all, the fact is that the Labor Party is the political arm of the trade union movement.
Tony Abbott seems to be avoiding talking about industrial relations reform, sort of like the plague, I suppose. Do you think there's any chance that he'll publicly start talking about industrial relations reform before the next election? Do you think that this is a bogeyman that Tony Abbott can pick up again and run with?
There's no bogeyman here, David. I mean, there is just simple economic facts, and the simple economic facts are that when you massively re-regulate the labour market, the impact of that is to make Australia less competitive. The impact of that is to drive productivity down. You know, I often hear Labor Party members making comments like, oh, but we're making sure that people have more money by giving them higher penalty rates, for example, on weekends and outside of business hours. Now, at first blush, that seems like a great idea. I mean, who'd be opposed to a pay increase, right? But the reality is that when Labor does this, what they do is they make it more expensive for people to get a job. And when they make it more expensive for people to get a job, fewer employers actually go out there and employ people. Now, we're doing quite well as a country because we're in the middle of a mining boom, and that's sucking up a lot of labour. But we know that at a retail level, in the tourism industry, for example, in a lot of the construction industry, up the entire east coast of Australia, we are effectively in a recession when it comes to employment and when it comes to actually getting people out there in jobs because of the re-regulation of the labour market in no small measure.
Senator Di Natale, on the carbon trail, Tony Abbott is out and about today. He's in Tamworth. Julia Gillard seems to have slowed down the pace somewhat. Tony Abbott accused her yesterday of having already worn out her shoe leather. Do you think the pace has slowed down somewhat when it comes to selling this carbon tax and ETS?
Oh, not at all. I think we've got several years in which to prosecute the argument for why we do need a price on pollution. I think that Julia Gillard's doing a good job at the moment. It's a tough job. It's in the face of a scare campaign. I noted that Tony Blair visited.
You'd be the only one.
I noted that Tony Blair visited the country recently, and we've got to remember it was a Conservative Prime Minister that introduced the notion of climate change and putting a price on pollution in the UK, in Margaret Thatcher. We've also got to remember that in the UK they are much more ambitious in terms of their approach to climate change, largely again through the efforts of a Conservative government in that country. So it's unfortunate we've got an opposition leader who's doing everything he can to be equivocal about the silence, and I congratulate Malcolm Turnbull for his comments in this area. He's absolutely right. This is a question of science. It's a question of reason and logic versus ignorance and fear, and he was right to make that argument. Look, we've got to get a price on pollution. It's the only way we're going to meet the challenge of climate change, but also ensure that Australia's economy has a long-term future in growth industries like renewable energy and energy efficiency. So there's a long time to prosecute the debate. The debate's not going to be won and lost in the coming weeks or months, and the Australian people will make their judgment at the next election.
Steve Ciobo, do you think Tony Blair added any weight to the Prime Minister's case and the Greens' case as well to act by pricing carbon, and also his comments that the world is moving?
Well, I don't think that Julia Gillard could take any solace in anything that Tony Blair said. I mean, he stopped short of any sort of endorsement of what the Labor Party's up to, and it comes down to this, David. I mean, it doesn't matter which way you cut it. The fact is that the Labor Party has committed Australia to the most massive new carbon tax. If the Greens had their way, if people like Richard had their way, they want the price or the tax to be set at $100 a tonne. The Labor Party settled on $26 a tonne. And, you know, what we know is that this is going to massively increase costs right across Australia. And that's the reason why now the Prime Minister's running scared. It's the reason why the Labor Party members have gone missing missing in action. It's the reason why instead of having a Labor member on your program this morning, you've got a Green senator, because they're actually the ones that are calling the shots these days. It's not the Labor Party, it's the Greens. They're the ones that are in power in the Labor Party. They're the ones that dictate what the agreement should be. So it's left up to blokes like Richard to come on programs like this and talk about they think that the Prime Minister's doing a great job, which is exactly what he just said. And the reality is that Australians reject Labor's carbon tax because it's been introduced off the back of a lie, a Prime Minister who said she wouldn't introduce a carbon tax and now has, and they know instinctively that Australia introducing this massive new tax is going to be bad for the future of our country.
Okay, well, unfortunately we are out of time. I'm sorry, Richard, we are out of time. We do have to wrap it up there. I'm sorry to cut you off. And I can assure our viewers that we will be speaking to some Labor politicians as the day goes on. Richard Di Natale and Steve Ciobo, thank you very much for your time, and thanks for watching AM Agenda.
Thanks, David.
We'll have more politics throughout the day. Thanks very much.